Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I am your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Patrick Sellin. This episode explores the transformative power of surrender, embracing paradox and vulnerability, and cultivating conscious connections through heart and breath. The entire conversation is gracefully guided by Patrick's poignant poetry. Patrick is a heart-centered healing artist specializing in psychospiritual guidance, conscious connected breathwork, and mystical poetry. He is a certified facilitator and senior trainer in the Breathwave conscious breathing community, where he hosts retreats, trainings, and ceremonies across the Cascadian bioregion, namely Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. He also offers integral breathwork healing sessions from his therapy studio in Portland, Oregon. Beyond these passions, Patrick offers original Gaian folk songs and guided breathwork journeys under his musical artist name, Patrick Pilame. If you are curious about any of my other offerings, such as the personalized threshold counseling that I provide for individuals and couples, or if you would like to explore past episodes of this project, or any of my latest essays, simply visit coyotecouncil.earth. You'll find a direct link in the show notes. Additionally, I want to extend an invitation for you to join our monthly newsletter, where I share updates on new podcast episodes and other creative happenings. You can easily join on our website. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the show on your preferred podcast platform. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares play a vital role in supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, I would like to invite you to breathe more fully than you have all day, maybe more than you have all week or all month. Deep, slow inhales down into the stomach, filling the lungs and the chest and up to the throat, and then exhaling the same way. Full, three-dimensional, fully ensouled and inspirited breaths as we turn our attention to this soulful conversation with our dear guest, Patrick Sellin. Great. Okay, so whenever you're ready, you can send us off.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for inviting this beginning with a poem. I'll be reading from My Soul to Keep. And this poem's called The Beloved. Your birth was a wedding arranged by you. Your birth was a wedding arranged by you. You so loved the world that all the ancestors and 1,000 eager souls agreed. This one will carry our fire forward. You knew about your body, all the shadows and its genes, and all the griefs you'd wrestle into gifts. Even shame is an ally, announcing where your gold mine is. Don't you dare believe you came all this way to waste your inheritance. Don't you dare believe the lie of a loyalty to anything less than a fuck yes. Love is a rose you gift yourself, even though you know it's wilting. And life is a way of walking, knowing wherever you go, the way is blessed. Everywhere you go, you bring the beloved. Everywhere you go, you bring the beloved.
Yeah. Thank you for that, brother.
Yeah.
Wow. Could like feel my roots drinking up some nutrients that may have been missing for a while through that beautiful story, that beautiful prayer.
Hmm.
I as I was telling you before we started the recording, I read through your whole book of poetry, and it's incredible. It's so beautiful and
Mm.
tender and raw and playful too. One of the themes that I recognized seemed to be this through thread, one of the many, was this theme of surrender. And I really felt that in the one you just shared there too. And as we enter into this emergent space together of communicating, languaging, creating, storying together, surrender feels just even more present, obvious, important. So I would like to start there in the wake of that poem. What does surrender mean to you now? And how has your relationship changed over time? And how does it
Hmm.
move you into currents of acceptance and creativity in your life?
Hmm. Beautiful question. I love this starting place because it's easy to forget that we're constantly accumulating ideas or information or experiences that we might unconsciously identify with, or there's an emotional charge that we haven't given full presence to, and so we're starting to carry around, you know, many things that might need to be laid down or let go. So this concept of surrender, I think, is an ongoing process for us humans because we have this unique capacity to self-reflect and contract consciousness onto things that matter to us or things that are relevant for the time. But then we start to notice that we're getting bogged down or feeling heavy, or we're feeling spread thin and there's not enough emptiness or availability to be fully present with, the new moment,
Mm.
or with a new relationship or whatever it might be. And so it seems like life is constantly calling us into this exploration of new ways to surrender, and to not see that surrender as a loss, but as an act of trust, and a way that we empty ourselves out so that we can be filled up again with the presence of what's alive and dynamic in our life at that new moment, or this new moment. There's there's another poem in the book, under the poem Resurrection,
Yeah.
where I say that, yeah, surrender isn't giving up. It's ceasing to resist a life that's replacing what's already lost.
Mm, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that line. Can you say that again?
Yeah. Yeah. Surrender isn't giving up. It's ceasing to resist a life that's replacing what's already lost.
Yeah.
And the miracle is that nothing true is ever truly lost.
Mhm.
Nothing essential is ever fully, given up, or it comes back in new forms. And so
Mhm.
there's this reciprocity based on trust
Mm.
rather than a hoarding of things based on scarcity or fear. So surrender just feels so central to this process of having a trusting and beautiful relationship with ourselves and with the impermanence of life as it flows, through us and for us.
Yeah. I was having the image in my mind as you're exploring this incredible topic of surrender, of being at the shore and being in that seemingly liminal space of the shoreline, right? That never I mean, nothing ever finds any kind of static position, right? There's always this homeodynamics process happening, but it's so obvious at the shoreline, it's constantly shifting and sifting, and to be those creatures or those so-called inorganic beings that make up the shoreline is to be in like one of the most profoundly evident positions of surrender in every single moment. I've been blessed to be able to spend some time at the shoreline recently as I'm here in Costa Rica, and I'm always blown away at how just incredibly elegant these beings, these constituents, these aspects of the shoreline are able to surrender themselves to that tumultuous, powerful process of the ebbing and flowing. And I'm wondering how your relationship with that ebbing and flowing has grown over time, how it's changed over time. How old are you now today?
Yeah, I'm 38.
You're 38, so 38 years of life. You just described surrender in such a beautiful way. You brought in the essential element of trust. Trust and surrender are sisters. But I wonder, like, maybe you haven't been able to speak so eloquently to it in the past, So what's really forged that embodied eloquence, if you will?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. This image of the shoreline is something I want to keep us and, like keep conscious as we're having this conversation. So really seeing ourselves there at the, there's no more like epic and clear of a reflection than the ocean of reality being made up of waves and vibrations, which is the realm of energy, which is the realm of spirit. And then here's this meeting ground with the solidity and the material, world of matter. And so to answer your question, this meeting ground of, we could say, the quantum field and, the material physical plane, requires a capacity for two truths, or at least two perceptual truths, to be true at the same time. And so one of the things that's grown for me in terms of my capacity to articulate my inner experience of what it's like for me to be human is starting to increase my capacity for reality and increase my capacity for paradox. And there's a lot of ways to cultivate that practice. Guided imageries, meditation helps us start to see the way that we identify with one thing rather than the other, or we notice different ways that we other ourselves, from certain groups. And so the ability to really start to see the wholeness has to start somewhere deep and intrinsic within was part of my discovery over the last 38 years. So growing up in a more Western Christian, urban environment, it took quite a bit of meandering through that, that perspective of how to see reality into something that felt much more resonant, that brought me back to my body, that brought me back into like an ecological understanding of identity and soul. So there was quite a bit to unlearn first before I could have a capacity to allow multiple truths, to coexist. And one of the central practices for me in cultivating a capacity for paradox has been breathwork, and this fundamental practice of balancing an inhale and an exhale in a connected way until the two processes become one fluid process is a very intrinsic, simple, and accessible way for all of us to practice expanding our capacity for conscious connection to ourselves, to our bodies, and then of course to paradox beyond us.
Yeah, and to become more intimate. It's an opportunity to become more intimate with the inherent contraction and expansion of creation, of life, that our breathing is the most fundamental, obvious, consistent way to remember that with every contraction, there's an expansion, and that expansion is always going to contract again.
Mhm.
This has been something that's come up for me lately in many different ways of being invited to surrender, to trust the process of the contraction in my life. Not just with the breathing, of course, with everything, there's these cycles that seem evident for me in my life where, as a very simple example, I want to naturally be more quiet, for a time, that I don't want to see very many people or even leave the house very much, that there's this. And then at some point, if I don't hold on too tightly and I allow myself to be natural and loose with that process, at some
Mhm.
point, I want to breathe out. I want to leave. I want to go out. I want to meet
Mhm.
people, and right. And I noticed that too in creative processes as well, with writing, for example. And so I wonder, on that thread, have you have you noticed that in your own life and in your creative processes? And along with breath work, what are some other ways in which you choose to consciously approach this natural ebbing and flowing?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I very much resonate with your expression of that expansion and contraction, and in my own life, feeling like the first 30 years was a lot of expansion,
Mm,
and seeing how much I didn't know, and seeking, to connect and to integrate as much as I could, as holistically as I could, as quickly as I could,
mm,
so that kind of ambitious, like, Western psychological approach, the paradox is like I've never had more access and more resonance with the things that I'm expanding into, and yet something is feeling distant, and that something feels like me. And so it started to feel hypocritical. It started to feel stressful. It started to feel like I was having to uphold all the things I'd expanded into without being able to come back into center and just disappear into nothingness and into the silence. So yeah, I resonate with that process, and the you know the way that breath, and I'll anchor this piece in and then speak about some of the other practices for me, that in my like devotional spiritual pursuits within my life, it was such a humbling and almost laughable discovery to come to conscious connected breathing for the first time and realize, quality that precedes all other spiritual bypassing, denying my conscious connection to myself through the simplicity of breathing,
mm,
was for me what linked it all together. Everything I'd studied, everything I'd seen came back into a felt perception of breath, or a felt perception of spirit inside my body.
mm,
And that's where it all really came home to me, was the search really ended there for me. And I didn't know how fully I was still searching until I felt my spirit fully rest in peace in my body
mm,
through a session of conscious connected breathing. That shifted everything for
mm,
me. And so that ambition was seen more for what it was, which was an anxiety, to prove myself or to keep up with other people, and or wherever it might be. And that's really, even before breath, a couple of years before breath, I started to sense that and feel that deeper call into stillness with nature. And that's where the poetry started to flow.
mm,
And that that became one of the fruits or one of the expressions of my solitude, was that the deeper I come in to myself, paradoxically, I have more to share and expand back out into. And I'm bringing from myself. I'm not bringing, highlighted, pieces of text from my new favorite teacher. I was bringing things that were indigenous to my own direct experience. And so I started to unlearn some of the more, like, I don't know if I would say obsessive, but just excessive ways of trying to bring things to the potluck, of
Mm-hmm.
connection in the community, because it was just a sense of, if something wants to come, it will come from that inner communion. So poetry really became one of those ways that I would look forward to being alone and expand into that not aloneness, with nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The more in the times of my life where I've spent more time in wild spaces, and particularly in solitude, like you're saying, it's incredible sometimes how present the muse can be.
Mm,
Um, like there's been times where I go and I sit out on the limb of a broad-leafed maple over top of a river, and an incredible poem just comes through, like just like that, like
mm,
almost fully informed, like like I was just able to somehow cup my hands and tenderly like support it as it wanted to come through in that moment. And I know that that wouldn't have happened if I didn't go out onto the limb of the maple, for example. That
mhm.
wouldn't have happened if I stayed in the city, if I didn't take the time to go out and hollow out, like we were speaking to at the beginning. It's a surrendering, and through that
Yeah.
surrendering, like you're saying, the paradox is, well, actually, true action comes through surrender.
Mm,
Activity transforms or um, is changed in some fundamental way into action, to
mhm.
this way of just being moved by the natural flows of the movement of the moment. But I would love to bring in another poem if you're into that. There's one that
Yeah.
I really um, wanted to hear you share with us that I grabbed here when I was reading. It's the one called How It Happens. So if you could
Mhm.
please share that with us, that would be really great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. The introduction that you just gave of true action coming from surrender. Just want to pin that at the top here for
Yeah.
this poem. How it happens. Remember how it happens. How all that's left is emptiness, folded heavy in your chest, as all your attachments stare blankly back at you. How all that's left is looking for new ways to surrender as you raise your whitest sail and set your soul for departure. How there's no such thing as answers, only questions in the form of horizons. Remember how it happens. How you could be anything, how you could believe anything, become anything, anytime. How here you always are, how now it always is, how love is all that ever is, and all you were was emptiness. All you were was emptiness. And how sure you were you knew before the wind snuck up behind you. And off we go into that surrender flow.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that the lines there about the answers always being horizons.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. that imagery. It feels so true to me.
Mm,
Because even when we feel like whenever I feel like I've come to some kind of answer, when I really feel into it, I recognize it to be momentary, of
mm.
course, the nature of things, right? But there's this sense, like maybe just in our culture, there's this sense like you find an answer, it's the answer.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
just noticing how that's actually maybe some kind of strange sickness in a way. You know, I
Hmm.
look back at my life and how much, maybe even like damage, at the very least, pain has arisen through this like grasping, this gripping kind of seeking that I've had for answers.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when I'm able to rest in this knowing that you're speaking to in the poem, that actually it's always going to be a horizon, meaning that the becoming, you said you could become anything. And I would say yes. And also to become anything means, I think, that you're always becoming that thing, you know? There may
Hmm.
be ever a point of having become, but that there's always the process of becoming, right?
Yeah.
And that helps with that understanding that you're always moving toward the horizon. So then the invitation is surrender, because you'll never reach the horizon in the way that you think you might or that you hope you would. And that there's a medicine to that there's a bittersweet medicine to that.
Hmm.
You have
Yeah,
anything
well
to say
said.
about that?
Yeah, beautifully said. I love the way that you, yeah, spun that out. And it, for the ego, for the one we think we are, that's been instrumental for our survival strategies, the ego does remember all the things it needs to know, it thinks, to succeed or to get by or to maintain connection. And so the process of surrender for the ego, of our ideas of ourself, feels dangerous. It doesn't feel safe to let go and surrender because we don't trust a larger intelligence beyond what we needed to do, in our perceived aloneness to maintain safety or connection. Say with our primary caregivers, if we had to choose between authenticity and attachment, we would choose attachment and do that, So we all have this inbuilt experience of it's not it, or is it safe to really let go?
Yeah,
And another, we could also say, is it safe to be honest?
yeah,
Is it actually safe to be honest in my close relationships? Like, am I going to get judged? Am I going to get kicked out of the group? And am I going to be abandoned or rejected for bringing my presence, my honest presence into this? And I think one of the ways that this ego dynamic and this process or this discipleship to surrender becomes even more complicated is, at least in our English language, our language is so noun centric, person, place, or thing. And so we think in very static ways
mhm,
about ourselves and about reality. And so even our name and our birth certificate and where we're from, most of the questions that we socialize around are orienting towards static aspects of reality. And so neurolinguistically, we're already thinking in the term of, I found that answer. I finally found what I'm searching for, and now I can grab it, or I can take it, or I can consume it. And now it's mine.
mhm,
And that's just one aspect of perceived reality. Then there's this whole other one, that we've been talking about, that eventually we come to a ledge or we come to a dead end, and we're forced to face ourselves. We're forced to really look at the way that our psyche became over identified with the path it was taking
mhm,
because it thought it had the answer. And for me, that's an interesting way of defining psychopathology, which is within my field of study. It refers to mental disease or illness, or that term psychopath is something we're familiar with, of like someone that strayed so far off the collective path that maybe they're a danger to themselves or a danger to other people because
mhm,
they wandered away. so far. So we have this sense of danger of like, no, you got to stick to the path, and there's certain ways to do it. And developmentally, this is helpful for a time, like as children, it keeps us from running out in the road because we don't know that there's cars coming. But then we get to a place of maturity and development that it's safe to start to let go of some of the rules, safe to let go of some of the things that we've attached to make sure that we're safe and okay to venture out further than we've ever gone before. And so collectively, I do think that we're, identity development, but then also social and cultural development. We're at this place of realizing that we're going to have to surrender the old ideas and the old systems that have got us to this point so that we can surrender to a deeper intelligence. And Maria Rilke has a really sweet quote about surrendering to the intelligence of the earth. We'd rise up rooted like trees.
Yeah.
And so these questions of belonging, what does it mean to belong? Well, what does it mean for a seed to belong? It goes into the darkness, it disappears into the soil, the husk cracks, and it becomes something new. So this natural process and this intelligence is mirrored back to us in so many ways. It doesn't take us long to go out, into our nearest nature and start to see that this is the case, but we think that we're separate from that because we have so many aspects of conditioning that keep us perceivably separate from what we really are. Yeah.
Yeah. You said the seedling eventually grows out of the darkness, rises rooted, and becomes something new. And I instantly thought it becomes a landscape. It becomes a community. It becomes a bumblebee and wind and sunlight and water and mycelium and bacteria, And I think I've been thinking a lot lately about, obviously this project is called Wild Heart Revival. So I'm in this inquiry myself and my life, my loved ones, with incredible guests like you. Like, what is this wildness of heart? What is this wilderness that's inherent in our humanity, in our earthly beingness? And what does it mean to bring it to life, to revive it, to bring renewal to it? And so I'm thinking, of course, a lot about this, a concept that's probably more recognizable by most people is like rewilding. And there's this sense of rewilding ourselves, communities, our landscapes, our gardens, but also inherent in that there needs to be this rewilding of our stories, a rewilding of our language, a rewilding of the way in which we perceive, see each other, interact with each other, interact with ourselves. And I think stories are underlying to so much of that because we're so guided by the stories that we carry, the stories that we share and agree to with each other. And it reminds me of what you're saying about the language, how our language is so myopic in the way that it is so incredibly focused on the static, on what can be defined and what can be stayed as what it is. And that there's this, I think, in unearthing that realization, there's this invitation to reverb, if that's the way to say it, to bring more of a verbing into our language. And how is that even possible with this English that we're embedded within? I think that poetry is an essential aspect of that because poetry allows English to become, it's like maybe it makes it a little bit easier to creatively explore what it might be to rewild our language through poetry. There's something you said at the end of that poem, How It Happens, where you said, how sure you were you knew before the wind snuck up behind you. And that really found a place inside of me, and it's begging me to ask you the question of what is that? What does that mean to you? What is the wind that snuck up behind you? What are you saying there?
Yeah, I'd love to see and out a little bit. So I'll do my best to catch the slices that I'm getting, but I hear a question and yeah, like, the end of that poem being how sure you were you knew before the wind snuck up behind you, I think speaks to this quality of how we think we are our thoughts. We think we know who we are, and we think that we're primarily a separate entity from nature. And then like that seed in the surrendering process, we awaken to an identity that's much larger, much more fluid and evolutive than what we are. And so I think what I'm speaking to in this way is acknowledging this unique way that humans suffer in contracting consciousness through our brain, through our neocortex, and through our developmental stories. Like you're saying, we've really thought that we're heading the right way, or with the right person, or in the right career, but we come up against a new shoreline or a new horizon that begs us to consider again. And this is also at the heart of that resurrection poem of that surrender isn't giving up. It's not like you're losing or that you should feel ashamed for coming up against this moment of surrender. It's just a recognition that life is wanting to take on a new form through you, and that's central to what it means to be nature. It's central to what it means to be an earthling,
Mm,
is the constant decomposition, and reconstitution, the reemergence. And in that experience is the wilding that you're speaking to. The rewilding is an apprenticeship to those cycles.
mm,
So as we garden, as we, move through the jungles or the forests or wherever we're at, we start to see these teachings, these wisdoms come back to us. And where I like to take this back, you know, the the fountainhead for me of this is the way that this shows up within our breath. That if we miss our unique indigenous belonging to the earth of our body through our breath and through our a sustained presence, where we really get to know and feel connected to the sensations that are impulsing and ebbing and flowing in and through us, if we miss that, we miss our direct experience with the divine, or we miss our direct experience with new inspiration, which is the predecessor to our wild nature.
mm,
Feeling inspired and feeling moved, and having that vivacity in our life again is it's a mysterious quality that comes through this brave process of following our vulnerabilities into the wilderness of becoming whole.
mm, mm. How does liminality play into what you just shared? Where
Mm-hmm.
does the liminal fit in? And maybe you want to share that poem you wrote. Um, I think it's titled Liminality, right?
Yeah.
Uh, because, well, anyway, maybe you can just share it because there's a potency and everyone will feel it when you share this poem. And I'm just wondering, like, where is it best sprinkled into what you're speaking to?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah. Let's play with this one a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah. And just to put this piece there, that the liminality, I'm not sure that's actually a dictionary word, but it's that essence of the in-betweenness,
yeah.
and which is not somewhere that the mind or the thinking, self likes to be, because there's uneven ground there. So that's what we're meaning when we speak about the liminal. When the world becomes a lifeless night, a waiting room of no apparent purpose, let the silence be your medicine, your trusty night watch. Such times are no time for ecstasy or new lines of conversation. but for solemnity and gathering wood. Haunt yourself a while. Haunt yourself a while. Be horrified by your own lack of light. So when the dawn does indeed rise, you'll have the humility to feel its origin within you. Your dead silence will raise gifts for others. The northern lights will prefer your own backyard. And others may not perceive the heavenly show, but they will see wraiths of color in your eyes. They will warm their hands on the fire of your faithful preparation if you learn to trust the waiting room.
Mm. Hmm. There's so much in that. You're reminding me of Frank Ostaseski. You know Frank Ostaseski? No?
Oh, no.
He's he started the Zen Hospice Project in LA, or anyway, somewhere in California, I think. Sat with thousands of people as they were dying at the end of their lives. He wrote a book. It's incredible. The Five Invitations, it's called. One of them, or one of the concepts that he brings in throughout that book, I highly recommend the book to everyone. One of the concepts you're reminding me of is this idea of non-waiting waiting.
Mm.
Non-waiting waiting. And that's what that poem elicits for me. I mean, at the end there, you call it a waiting room, but it's like in the poem, you're drawing out the idea that it's a non-waiting waiting space.
Mm-hmm.
You're not actually there to be rendered into this, because it's like when I think about waiting in a psychological way, for me at least, in my experience, there's usually this kind of maybe even like an agitation that can be there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting on something, it's coming, and when it comes, then I won't be waiting. The invitation from Frank, this non-waiting waiting, and what I feel in your poem is that actually you can be in that liminal space and you can gather firewood and you can start a fire and you can grow and you can root and you can change. And actually, that's what the liminal is really there for, is to be revitalized, to touch into some kind of renewal, some kind of transformation. I wonder what comes up for you in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love you catching that and using Frank's terms there of like, there's a paradox again,
Yeah.
right there. And so this is to keep coming back to it. It's, we get to the edge of our understanding, and I love the way that you're catching the both andness, and this is exactly the nature of it. If when we feel stuck and it feels like we have to just say we're stuck in a waiting room, nothing's happening, it seems, and there's this process of letting go, one of the things that happens is that we open up, we expand our capacity to see what's really going on. We see in different dimensions, or we start to see magic in the mundane. And all of a sudden, the thing we were searching for isn't as important as what we're experiencing in the now. And then the thing that we were searching for comes and finds us because there's a gravity around what we're doing, for example. And so the the metaphor to me that's been the most powerful has been conscious connected breathing. It's been my breath practice, where for the first 5 minutes it seems like I'm just kind of mechanically breathing and just doing the thing, going through the motions, and it feels like a waiting room. It's, as much as I've experienced transpersonal and catharsis experiences and beauty and samadhi type moments, every time I come back, it feels like a waiting room, because that's how far, the brainwave states of just my, everyday external focus gets from that deep internal space. And so it's really a ceremony in the liminal. We move through brainwave states that start to reveal and express very different potentialities within our body. And then that physiology starts to speak with our mind, and our mind is witnessing something very new start to happen. And if we develop, wakefulness and consciousness within that dynamic practice, we get to be awake for the northern lights. We get to experience how beautiful it gets, and we're experiencing it right in our own body. And so this developing the capacity for paradox and developing the capacity to be in the liminal space, it's not a comfortable space to be in the liminal.
No.
Like if you're losing your job, or if you lose a partnership and you don't know who you are anymore because you're separating, that's the liminal space. And if you don't have the composure to be present and to feel fully, to grieve fully what you love being lost, you're going to miss the seed, or what's true within that love, or what's true within that course that you were taking. It's going to continue to become more of itself in maturing dimensions of beauty, if you have the composure, if you can trust the waiting room, if you can trust that process, of regeneration. And so, it shifts us back into this more wild heart that has to feel the full extremes of the human experience. If you don't feel grief, you're not going to get to feel the ecstasy and the joy to the same degree. If you close down that window, you close down both at the same time. You think you're protecting yourself from pain, but you're really protecting yourself also from the ecstasy of a new epiphany or a new connection. And so I think at least the rewilding process includes that capacity for the liminal, so that we don't get so myopic and stuck, as you were speaking to.
Yeah, it's becoming obvious to me through this conversation that the breath is our trusted, sometimes elusive, always eternally present guide through all of these ways of exploring our inner and outer landscapes. That it's a key relationship in being able to experience and integrate any kind of truth that might arise through these kinds of processes that we're speaking to, and to really glean the wisdom in an embodied way through any kind of threshold, through any kind of liminal space that is inevitable. We can't not go through these liminal threshold spaces in our lives. And the more that we can practice it with embodied conscious breath, the more we're going to be able to really be with it all, to feel all the depths of texture and felt sense experience throughout it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to dive into the breath more with you, and how you integrate what is known as integral psychology into your understanding of breath work, as an intentional transformational practice. Before we get into that, I want to bring in one more topic that will hopefully be supportive to that. Something that came up for me when reading the poem that you titled, what was it here? I think it was, What a Snake Won't Say, which to me has this important undercurrent of drawing our awareness or our attention to the essential relationship building with our own intuitive capacities, in a way, amongst other things. So I wonder if you could share that poem, and we could dive into what's there, and then that can lead us into this topic of integral psychology and breath.
Beautiful. That poem doesn't get asked to be shared too often, so I appreciate that you're bringing it in a unique way. I think it does absolutely resonate with this topic. So the poem What a Snake Won't Say. Yes, you chose a path. It seemed good and right, but now it's a noose. You can barely breathe. And when you pull away, the grip gets tighter. That's how you know it's a trap. If when you pull away, the grip gets tighter. Yes, it's confusing. And it may feel cruel that your salve includes the bite it's meant to cure.
Yeah, just love the powerful thread of paradox that's so evident in all of this. But so do you get what I mean? Like when you wrote that poem, when that came through, were you feeling that that thread of the intuitive thread, the intuitive
Yeah,
text? Yeah.
yeah. That poem was a confluence of, at the time, one of the most beautiful relationships I'd been in, and a recognition of this dynamic of codependence
Mm,
that was present within the midst of it. So it was a really illustrious, it was a beatific sort of trap.
mm,
It was a paradox in that way, of feeling the heart so open and surrendered to a love that felt resonant and attuned, and that including something that I intuitively knew was going to toxify the beauty if it wasn't addressed, or if it wasn't, cleansed within the relationship. And so that pain and that frustration was where that poem came from.
Before you go on, if it feels comfortable enough for you, would you be willing to speak to that a little bit more so that we
Mm,
can understand a little bit more about what you mean? Because that, what you just said is, I think, something that all of us understand in some way and that probably confuses us
mhm,
often. I know
mhm.
it does for me. So could you go there with us?
Yeah, I think I can open that up a bit more. Um, yeah, that relationship began at a very innocent space for me. It was the first lovership that included for me a conscious experience of self-love. I felt really excited about the relationship, and I felt very worthy of being in the relationship. I felt very seen by the relationship. And so that was the first time that I was like, I'm really just simply being what I am. And I can see how adored I am for that, and how adorable this seeing and this reciprocity is. So it was very, very powerful. The gravity of that and the recognition was such a gift, between the two of us. And the codependence was a dynamic, not to single out certain parts, but what I was seeing was a past relationship of hers with her children's father, continued to pull on her freedom and her ability to have that autonomy that she had earned for herself, professed
Mm,
for herself. But I could see, oh, here we are, like in this togetherness and in this stage of cultivation, but within yourself there's still dynamics of fear and of what happens financially, what happens as a potential threat to your children if you completely lean in and follow your heart in this space and trust that this is going to bring something in. So it was, for me, an observation of that dynamic of codependence, that had like its own material, financial aspects that we all are familiar with in life. Like, oh, if I just had a little bit more resource, I'd be more free, and then I'd be able to. And life seems to invite us to surrender before it makes sense. It's faith, like not just blind faith, but it's like you're saying, it's that sensation and intuition that if we have a capacity to trust and start to recognize that this is just what it means to be human, and likely won't make sense before I make the leap, then we can start to step into the miracle of life. We can step into the, you know, the death experience with consciousness, and we can experience the resurrection experience in a conscious way without getting stuck in these attachments or these traps. And that's a really cruel teacher, which is what I'm saying. Like, it was cruel for me, it was cruel for her to see the way that those dynamics was like, this is just the geometry right now of the way energy can flow in this relationship. It includes all of our relations. It's not, we're not just this dyad. We of course exist within, you know, a community of energies, and you know, so you start to feel and see how this is the case. And then what you'll do, you know, like if that's the case and I were to choose to you know, minimize or diminish the pain or the frustration of not feeling like there was full resonance or full availability for us to evolve together in that space, if I hadn't spoke up for that, we might have missed the chance for a new transformation to occur for myself or for her. Whether that meant, you know, that we were together or not, we would be in some ways restricting or denying life. And you know, one of the terms I really like from my Christian background, this scripture that is talking about blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, which if you look at those, the word for spirit and breath are synonymous.
Yeah.
You know, so and the word blasphemy in this context in the Aramaic can be understood as restricting or holding one's breath. And of course, this is the unforgivable sin. All the other sins can be forgiven, but if you restrict nature, if you resist what nature does, if you're gonna, you know, be at odds with or enmity with yourself, and you hold your breath against what's needing to move, what must move, you can't be forgiven for that. You just need to breathe. You need to trust and let the, you know, the breath flow, let the spirit flow, let the energy flow.
Yeah.
You know, and then paradoxically, the forgiveness is just in returning to your true nature. So I think that's a really good example of what we're coming back to is, you know, if we look at that ecologically, we're forgiven immediately the moment that we come back into coherence with her.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, the breath is spirit. And near kind of the beginning of what you were saying there, I was thinking, wow, it's, you know, we have these deep intuitive feelings in our system, they arise, and it's such a delicate balance to strike because of course we perceive ourselves as individuals oftentimes in our culture. And so there's this, and we do have this unique aspect of our soul that's connected to the one soul that's definitely here to grow through us in a unique way. And so there is this quality of individualism in that, but I think it's very nuanced and a very big topic, but it's important to consider because we feel these intuitive feelings and they can be strong, but they become, for me, and I think for many people, almost immediately confusing because, of course, we look out into the world and we recognize, well, we're in relationship with other souls that are also having intuitive experiences of what they need, and their need is connected to our need, and we can't escape from the matrix of which we are, which is this deeply interbeing self that we are co-arising and emergent in the moment with all of these relationships as you're speaking to. So I was thinking, I was like, damn, how do you strike that balance? And then you brought up spirit and breath. I thought, well, okay, of course, you return to your breath to become as clear and present as you can. And then you speak your breath. You bring out your voice and you bring the other into collaboration, either through prayer or through conversation or through song or story. And you begin to co-create with your relations through your voice. And that's how you begin to balance that out from being not only just a fully internal experience of having these deep intuitive feelings and senses, but then to invite the other the so-called other into that through our voice.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so I would like to bring that into um, talking about this topic of cultivating some kind of intentional practice with what people call breath work, and how that is connected to the heart and the lungs, of course, which are neighbors with the heart, right? They're coupled in such a powerful way, and how it's connected to our voice and our intuitive capacity and our ability to
Mhm.
be present not only with ourselves, but then to share presence with others. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I can offer an alchemy of the first question about integral breath work, how integral psychology connects with this practice of conscious connected breathing. So, the listeners and our community can kind of understand what this particular practice can do and how to work with it. And just share a little bit too about this, this realm of
Please.
of integral psychology. And I love, you know, this thread that you're talking about of intuition and impulse. That's something that we're all starting to orient towards, that maybe we've been conditioned to follow you know and obey orders from something that's not really coming from within, that's not serving us. And so when we start to recognize that that's true, we're never more vulnerable to mistrusting or doubting that intuition is actually going to serve us and come through, because it's this very innocent. And maybe there is trauma, maybe there is like a dissociation from what it feels like or means to trust your intuition. And so we're cumbersome at it, at first, especially if we're bringing it into community and we're trying to come into our voice and really own our truth and do that. And other people are like, well, me too. I want to do that as well. All of a sudden, we're like little kids in a sandbox trying to play with one toy, you know? And so that ends up being a very humbling experience, and maybe enough reason to give up on community or give up on your own intuition, because of how difficult it is for that innocence, the inner sense, which is a nice synonym for intuition, the innocence or the inner sense that just has this holy perception and this way of just seeing the fullness and coming in such an unrestricted way, and being in that flow of the energy or in that flow of life in a way that the mind can't quickly or neatly analyze or make sense of. It can't codify it because it's in surrender to that energy and that impulse that it's happening.
Mm.
And so having a practice like conscious connected breathing, I want to describe what it's like when we gather in ceremony, because if we're in a circle of people and we have trained facilitators that are skilled at looking at identifying patterns of resistance in the breath rhythm itself, in the breather's breath pattern. And so through verbal coaching or through affirmative prayer or through hands-on facilitation, we just start to simply bring attention to what's the case. And so we're consciously connecting to what's blocking the flow of breath or blocking the flow of inspiration from fully moving freely through the body. And so the moment we do that, we're being emptied. We're surrendering an unconscious pattern of resistance. And then what happens is we start to come in greater coherence with our own body wisdom. And so the deeper we start to cultivate this practice individually, there's also the capacity to start to experience a very different experience of communication with community and socializing from that place of inner coherence. When I first came into like a really activated and full experience of the conscious connected breathing, after even like 15 minutes of a lot of relaxation to let my nervous system really soak that up and integrate what I'd felt and expressed, I wanted to share from that space and I was trembling. The
Mm.
energy was just so alive in me, and I could feel it. I could feel my heart even more central to the message of my speaking in like an organic way. I could feel how, like I could feel my heart trembling And it wasn't because of nervousness. It was because there was there was more energy and oxygen and coherence with my brain and my belly that was cultivated, and it was brand new and it was intense. I could barely hear myself talk because my ears were ringing.
Mm,
And I had this feeling that was very similar to poetry, that when I feel inspired to write a poem, it usually comes as a feeling, or it comes as a sound that I recognize in like the bird, or a sound even in like the voice of someone saying something, and I just notice my mind grab onto that feeling quality or to the timbre of their of their voice, and something about that resonance becomes what the poem is. And the art, of course, is like putting grammar and imagery to it, but that happens pretty organically as the energy gets honored. The intuition, the inspiration is honored. It's more about like the mouth feel of the words and how the ideas syncopate with each other rather than how the idea flows in a mental way. And
mm,
so there's just this really unique personal way of starting to feel into what that is and how it feels coming out of my body when I speak it aloud or when I write it, or how it looks on the
mm,
page. And all those things kind of gather into a very unique expression, of what started with just a spark of intuition. Bringing that back into the ceremony of breathing, when we start to cultivate and get mature in our emotional intelligence, and we take responsibility for ourselves and what's coming up with us, we're starting to surrender a whole lot of drama and a whole lot of patterns of needing affirmation from external sources, because we're feeling fulfilled and we're feeling valid in our own being, because we've just given ourselves everything they need to function at their highest potential. And so we're really optimized and coherent, within our own heart head experience. And then we start to talk from that space. And it's very beautiful to see that most of the time what ends up being shared resonates and ripples so powerfully through the group because of the coherence that's been established from emptying out our stored stress, our unsyncopated ways of perceiving. And then all of a sudden we're just in the present moment together, and we start to re-socialize ourselves to coherence and to beauty, and that lifts the vibration of trust and self-appreciation, because we all experienced ourselves as a real ingredient in that collective consciousness, that unitive experience. And so to me, that's not just a key, it's maybe even like the fountainhead, or the nucleus
mm.
experience, where the rest of the fractals of coherence and of community and new structures of gathering flow from. Because if we bypass our bodies and our felt experience, we won't feel like we belong in
Mm.
that synarchy of being, because we're not experiencing the synarchy within ourselves.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. It's like the breath organizes the self in this deeply psycho, spiritual, biological way. And of course, that then connects us in a more organized way to our environment and to each other. And the fact, too, that the lungs and the heart are sisters, that they're so intimately woven, that organization then draws energy and draws the balance point into that center, into that heart-centered point, which, as we're coming to know as we mature and take responsibility, as you're saying, is definitely the best place to rest in, to move from, to speak from. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that. I guess that's kind of like, you didn't really, for people who don't know much about psychology or integral psychology, you didn't like define it, and it's kind of maybe difficult to define, but that's kind of alluding to it. Um, it's this way of seeing the psyche as these, basically, by gathering up all the fragmented aspects of self into some
Mm-hmm.
kind of coherent way, to be integral in nature, to choose to consciously move toward a more integrated sense of self and environment. But I'd like to pass it over to you just to kind of amplify that, like how would you define integral psychology and connect that to the
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And it is a large topic because it's integral. And so it
yeah
includes, all things by the
yeah
nature of its, its pursuit. But one way to understand this, and for readers that or listeners that are interested in reading, you can go to Ken Wilber, and there's plenty of different angles around the concept of integral psychology. But one of the most basic things about integral psychology is that there's domains of consciousness. There's an individual domain, there's a collective domain, there's subjective experience, there's objective experience. And so all four of those domains of consciousness are co-occurring. And so here we're in a paradox that we can be so identified with our personal, individual, subjective experience that we forget to eat, and then we're hungry, and then our hunger influences our subjective reality, and now our collective experience is, of course, integrated within this whole thing. So it's like a map for the human psyche to understand, just so you know, you're in all four at once.
Mhm.
And there's ways that we mature and grow and expand consciousness in all four domains of that internal, external, subjective and objective experience of life. So that's the general understanding. A way to talk about this, which it might be interesting as it relates to this process of rewilding ourselves, from the very moment that we're born into the world, we're pretty undifferentiated consciousness as an infant from our mother and from the rest of our exterior environment. We're just this node of consciousness that there's no neat distinction between inner and outer and self and other and us. So as we start to expand consciousness through our body brain and grow up and develop a healthy ego and then develop a healthy sense of community, we're starting to go through these rites of passage. And one of the ways that integral psychology talks about this is that our development as humans is a constant process of fusion with new information. Like, say, in first grade, you've got to learn arithmetic. You really start to fuse with those. You just have to learn how it is. 2 + 2 = 4. And you're doing that. But then once you've got that, to get to the higher grades, there's some level of differentiation that we go through. And we experience this as first graders. It's like once you go to second grade, no one's less cool than the first graders because now you've advanced. So there's this really innocent sense of I'm excited, I'm starting to grow and differentiate. So there's fusion, there's differentiation, and then there's integration. And so those three processes are this constancy of creation and surrender, we could say, and then learning. And we're constantly expanding and deepening our understanding of what life means through that, threefold process. And in our culture today, we're pretty estranged from significant rites of passage that resonate with our soul identity, that resonate with ecology, that are recognized by the community, something that we've gone and done and come back, and they're in agreement that they're going to see us in a new way. We don't have those rites of passage. And I think at this point, the way that psychology is being integrated with psychedelics, with plant medicines, with other rewilding processes is in part this yearning for a more conscious connection to initiation. Mm-hmm. And to feel ourselves in that mystery of I do want to know what it's like to come to my edge, to surrender and come back a different person. Mm-hmm. So how do I do that? Do I take this pill? Do I go to the jungle? Do I have these experiences? Yes, you can do all of those things, but do you have that connection to the impulse within you that knows what's uniquely for you to meander? Because you have to do it yourself to some degree in order for the resonance of the community to include you as a real initiate and ingredient within that. And to wrap it up on this integral psychology and breathwork, one of the reasons I was so enamored with conscious connected breathing and the ceremonial approach to it is breathwave, which I'm certified in that modality called breathwave. And that one of the things that I could see is that we were self-initiating ourselves into shifts in consciousness. It wasn't a passive taking of a ceremony or of a pill. It was a participatory ceremony where we got to decide how deep we wanted to go, how much of the darkness we wanted to reveal by how much breath we were circulating in a safe way through our connected rhythm of breath. And so what that started to teach me was that I'm responsible for choosing life. I'm responsible for choosing to lean further into something that I don't understand, but somehow I already am. And the body is such a great teacher of this wholeness, and the way that coherence just ripples as blessing and healing for the body and for the mind. The answers that we've been seeking become, felt experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so that horizon we we're talking about, is ceremonialized very elegantly, very simply, and in a very safe way, that you don't have to go away for a week, into a retreat. You can do this on your own safely from your house with a little bit of support and understanding of what you're up to. So to me, that's just such a hopeful and blessed treasure to come across, and to be able to hold space for it, because people are starting to reclaim their power, and the peace within them to go through this process of rites of passage, for starting with themselves, and then it can be more, it can extrapolate from there. But I don't want us to miss ourselves in that process. So that's the beauty of what we can start to see within that fusion, is what needs to be unlearned, from all of our adaptive and survival strategies, in order to make way for those surrender experiences, for those initiations into a new identity that's
Yeah,
more verb than it is now.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Yeah, you said at some point there, you said to choose life. And I thought, well, to choose life is to choose death too. And that all of these initiatory experiences, whatever they may be, including conscious connective breathwork ceremonies or practice with the self, really they are they're offering us the opportunity to become more intimate with our understanding of endings and beginnings, understanding that to choose life, to choose breath and spirit, to be enlivened and ensouled by our breath in the moment, is also to choose that exhale, that last breath out that eventually
Mm-hmm.
will come to undo us at the end of our days. And I remember, I don't know which poem it was, you might remember, but there's like a line there you say, like, to live is and to die, to live and to die. You like cycle it like 4 times in the line there, and I just loved that. And I can see how your depth of experience with breath work has certainly informed your understanding of how important it is to always hold death dear, or to at least see it and witness it as dear, as essential to be able to live a good life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the image of, when we practice conscious connected breathing, we're laying in our back in this corpse pose, this shavasana. And, within the yogic tradition, pranayama can be understood here in the West as like controlling your breath, ways of breathing, and different ways of manipulating the breath to get different, experiences which have their benefits. But what I've learned is that that's through our teaching and our studies, is it's actually the inverse of that. Rather than breath control, it's about breath surrender.
Mm.
So our minds co-opt these powerful practices, and do see that there's a powerful aspect of learning to control and manipulate what's happening, because it does shift our chemistry, and it shifts our biology, and all of those things. But paradox is equally as true as you're saying. You can't choose the one without the other, and it's just so intrinsic and implicit within the corpse pose of this, that we're practicing dying before we die, you know.
Yeah.
Just apprenticing ourselves to like this will be, there will be a moment where my out breath is my last ceremony, it's my last act of
Mm.
love, and you know, on this planet. And so we practice letting go before we're forced to let go. And that poem is the resurrection poem, which the miracle of life is to truly live and truly die, to live and die and love and die and love and die and call it all my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful, brother. Well, we're coming to the ending, the death of this conversation, and it saddens me a little bit because I have so much more that I'd love to dive into with you. So maybe in the future we can come together in this way again. That would be a great gift. I'm wondering how to end this. I'm looking at 3 different poems of yours and wishing we could speak to them all, but I I think I'm feeling drawn to this Hearts Pound Primal poem,
Mm,
and maybe that's a good way to tie all this together. I don't know. What do you think?
nice. Yeah, that's another less. I really appreciate the way, Tay, that you're so present and receptive and capable. You feel like a contact dancer through the screen. You know, you're really responsive, and yeah, like you help flatter and into this space. It's obvious how much you care, and I feel that. And I'm hoping the listeners feel that as
Mm,
we close with this poem.
mm, thank you.
Mhm. What will happen to the children when the women run wild and the men stop rubbing their manes away? Many suffer their hells already, slack in the claws of stagnancy. Not I, not we. Our hearts pound primal, feeling what they feel every breath of every day, snarling at anything sleepy. And we jaw up cubs by the scruff and keep laying them by the river, waiting only so long for them to bless themselves, or else we leave.